Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. The drive home was quieter than usual. Sam sat in the passenger seat, her head tilted slightly toward the window, watching the reflection of streetlights flicker across the glass. Her fingers tapped idly against her leg, a habit I had only recently noticed. She was thinking about something she wasn't saying. While you're here, leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Normally, after a night like this, she would talk. She would recap the best parts of the evening, complain about how Megan never let anyone else speak, or roll her eyes at Chris's exaggerated stories. But tonight, nothing. Just silence. I gripped the wheel tighter. You all right? She blinked, like she had forgotten I was there. Yeah, just tired. Her voice was too even, too controlled. I nodded but didn't respond. A few miles later, she shifted, glancing at me. You seemed off tonight. I let out a breath. Did I? She nodded. A little. I kept my eyes on the road. Just had a lot on my mind. She hummed, but she didn't ask what. She used to. That was the difference. By the time we pulled into the driveway, she was already reaching for her phone. The screen lit up just as she stepped out of the car. She turned slightly, tilting the screen away from me. A habit. A small movement. But I caught it. She walked ahead, disappearing inside without another word. I followed, shutting the door behind me, exhaling slowly as I stood in the darkened entryway. Upstairs, I heard her moving soft footsteps, the creak of the dresser drawer. I stepped into the kitchen, resting my hands on the counter. The scent of grilled steak still lingered, mixed with the salt air from the open window. A perfectly normal night. A perfectly normal marriage. At least, that's how it was supposed to feel. I checked my watch. It wasn't late, but she would be asleep soon. Or at least, pretending to be. I moved carefully, taking the stairs one at a time, my steps silent against the hardwood. Our bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, she was already curled up under the blanket, facing away. Her phone was on the nightstand, screen down. Another new habit. I stood there for a moment, watching her breathing slow, steady. She had never been good at lying to me, but she had started trying. I exhaled and turned toward the guest room. For the first time in years, I shut the door behind me. And as I lay down, staring at the ceiling, one thought ran through my head. I had been ignoring the signs. Not anymore. The message came late. I had been sitting in the darkened living room, a half-empty glass of bourbon on the table, thinking through the last few weeks. The distance. The excuses. The subtle ways Sam had shifted, like a puzzle piece that no longer fit where it once had. The phone buzzed against the table. A single text from a number I didn't have saved. If you want the truth, check the marsh. I sat there, staring at the words. No name. No explanation. Just that. Outside, the wind rustled the palms, the sound low and constant. The marsh was only a few miles from the house, tucked just beyond the last stretch of road where the streetlights faded. It was a quiet spot, a place where people met when they didn't want to be seen. I exhaled slowly, picked up my keys, and headed for the door. The road curved along the water, the reflection of the moon rippling across the marshland. I killed the headlights as I pulled onto the shoulder, parking behind the tree line. It was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped out, moving carefully down the dirt path, the scent of salt and earth thick in the air. 100 scenarios ran through my mind, each one worse than the last. Then I saw them. Sam. And Ben. They stood near his car, bodies close, his hand on her waist. Her fingers rested lightly against his chest, and the way she looked at him, soft, familiar, told me everything I needed to know. Ben said something, and she laughed, tilting her head in a way I recognized. A way I used to think was meant only for me. My hands curled into fists at my sides. They hadn't noticed me. Not yet. I could have walked up, could have made a scene. But I had spent years calculating risk, weighing outcomes before making a move. And this moment? This wasn't the time for anger. This was the time for proof. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Then another. Then, just as quietly as I had come, I stepped back into the trees and left. The next morning, I started digging. Sam was in the shower when I checked her phone. She had changed the passcode, but I had ways around that. The messages were there. Not just from Ben, but from Chris, too. I scrolled through weeks of exchanges, coded in ways that only people who thought they were smarter than everyone else would use. Dinner plans disguised as meetings. Afternoons at the beach house labeled as errands. And late-night conversations, ones where she was careful not to say too much, but the meaning was clear. She wasn't just cheating. She was juggling them. Ben and Chris, two of my closest friends. A slow, measured breath left my lips. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about who she had chosen. And that was personal. I placed the phone back exactly as I found it, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. Sam walked in a few minutes later, a towel wrapped around her, hair damp. She smiled, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. "Morning," she murmured, heading toward the fridge. I watched her move, every gesture easy, practiced. A woman with no guilt. A woman who believed she was still in control. I leaned against the counter, nodding toward her phone. "You got any big plans today?" She glanced at the screen, then back at me, her smile never faltering. "Just running a few errands." I smiled. That sounds nice. And for the first time, I enjoyed the lie, because she had no idea what was coming next. Megan stared at the phone screen, her nails tapping a slow rhythm against the table. Another call from an unknown number. Another missed dinner. Another weak excuse. Ben wasn't even trying to be creative anymore. Across from her, Danielle swirled the last of her wine, watching the way the candlelight reflected off the glass. He lied again? Megan let out a breath, setting the phone down. Of course he did. Danielle leaned back. Chris, too. He said he was at the gym last night, but his car wasn't there. They had been having this same conversation for weeks, circling the same suspicions, collecting the same clues. At first, they thought it was just work stress. Then, they started noticing the patterns. Late nights, private messages, the subtle, instinctual way their husbands turned their phones face down whenever they walked into a room. The kind of things men did when they had something to hide. Danielle exhaled slowly. I started looking at Chris's social media. Megan lifted a brow, and Danielle's lips curved slightly. He thinks he's slick, but I checked his tagged photos. He untagged himself from a picture at the marina 2 weeks ago. Megan leaned in. Why would he do that? Danielle's smile didn't reach her eyes. Because I wasn't supposed to know he was there. Silence stretched between them. They weren't the type to accuse without proof. They knew their husbands, knew how quickly charm could twist a lie into something believable. So they had made a pact. No confrontation until they were sure. No accusations without a clear path to the truth. Megan exhaled. We need something solid. Danielle took a slow sip of wine, nodding. Then let's get to work. The more they looked, the worse it got. Phone records showed calls at odd hours. Texts that were deleted too quickly. And social media? That was the real gold mine. Chris wasn't careful. Ben wasn't, either. It wasn't the photos they posted. It was the ones they tried to erase. The ones where reflections gave them away. The ones where locations didn't match the stories they had told. Danielle sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through a thread Megan had sent. So, Ben worked late last Friday. Megan's voice came through the speaker. Except he was tagged in a post at the docks. Danielle frowned. Who posted it? Megan sighed. One of his coworkers. It's already deleted, but I got the screenshot. Danielle looked down. The photo wasn't direct, but it was enough. Ben in the background, beer in hand, standing too close to someone whose face wasn't in the frame. Someone wearing a bracelet that looked very familiar. Danielle inhaled sharply. Megan. What? She zoomed in, heart pounding. That bracelet. I've seen it before. A pause. Then Megan's voice, low and cautious. Where? Danielle exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. On Sam. Drew's discovery came at the worst possible time. Megan and Danielle had spent weeks looking for answers. They knew Ben and Chris were cheating. They just didn't know who with. Now they did. And it was Sam. Megan sat stiffly in her chair, fingers curled around the edge of the table. So let me get this straight. She exhaled, shaking her head. Your wife, our friend, has been sleeping with both of our husbands. Drew sat across from them, his expression unreadable. Yes. Danielle let out a breath, rubbing her temples. Jesus. Megan shook her head, laughing, but there was no humor in it. And here I was, thinking she was different. Drew leaned back, studying them. You already knew they were cheating? Danielle's jaw tightened. We had strong suspicions. But until now, we didn't know who. Megan's nails tapped against the table, sharp and precise. And Sam? She never even slipped, never gave us a hint. Drew shook his head. She's careful. Danielle scoffed. She's cold. The three of them sat in silence, letting it settle. Then Megan leaned forward, her voice steady. So what now? Drew met her gaze, his own unreadable. We make sure they all lose. Megan sat with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the glass of whiskey in front of her. Danielle was quieter, her nails tapping against the polished wood of the bar table. I leaned back, watching them both. "This isn't just about revenge," I said. "It's about taking control." Megan exhaled through her nose, finally looking up. "You think sleeping with us is the answer?" I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. "I think it's about evening the playing field." Danielle let out a breath. "And you think that will fix anything?" I shook my head. "Nothing gets fixed. But it changes the rules." Megan studied me, her expression unreadable. She was weighing the choice, the same way I had. Chris had risked everything for Sam. Ben had done the same. And Sam? She had played them both, at the cost of 3 marriages. Danielle leaned forward. "How do we even pull this off?" I set my drink down, my voice calm. "We do what they did." Megan tilted her head. "Which is?" I smirked. "We make them feel what it's like to be powerless." The plan took shape over the next few days. It had to be methodical, precise. There was no room for recklessness. Megan had access to Ben's bank accounts. She pulled every suspicious transaction from the past 6 months. Hotels, expensive dinners, unexplained cash withdrawals. Danielle took a different approach. She started playing along. Chris had been cautious, but he had a pattern. He preferred to meet Sam during the day, slipping away under the excuse of work meetings. Danielle started asking more questions. Started acting concerned instead of suspicious. It made Chris comfortable. And when men got comfortable, they got sloppy. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't question Sam's absences. Didn't change my tone or my schedule. I let her believe she still had the upper hand. Until the moment I didn't. A week later, I met Megan at the beach house. She sat on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, the ocean breeze catching the strands of her hair. She didn't look at me right away. "I used to wonder if Ben was bored with me," she murmured. "If maybe I had stopped being exciting." I leaned against the railing. "And now?" She finally turned, her gaze sharp. "Now I know he's just weak." Silence stretched between us. Then she smirked, slow and knowing. She stood, stepping closer. And that was how it began. 2 nights later, it was Danielle. She met me at the marina, standing barefoot on the dock, arms wrapped around herself as she stared out at the water. "I hate that he made me feel stupid," she said quietly. I exhaled. "You aren't." She let out a breath. "Neither are you." I turned, meeting her gaze. She didn't hesitate. She reached for me first. And just like that, the final piece was in place. The next morning, I checked my phone. Megan had posted a photo. It was simple. Just a shot of a champagne glass on a balcony, an empty second glass beside it. The location tag was the beach house. Danielle had done the same. A picture of her at the marina, a cryptic caption beneath it. Fresh starts feel different when you know you earned them. They weren't obvious, but they were enough. By noon, the messages started rolling in. From Ben. From Chris. From Sam. Each one laced with confusion. With panic. Because for the first time, they were the ones questioning everything. And this was only the beginning. The invitation came like clockwork. A casual group text from Ben. Weekend trip. Just the 6 of us. Same beach house, same setup. Let's make it happen. Like nothing had changed. Like our marriages weren't crumbling behind the scenes. I stared at the message, my grip tightening around my phone. Sam had seen it too. She walked into the kitchen, sipping her coffee, her expression carefully neutral. "Ben mentioned the trip last night," she said casually. "It's been a while since we all got away together." I leaned against the counter. "Yeah, it has." She nodded, brushing her hair over one shoulder. "You're still in, right?" I exhaled through my nose, keeping my voice steady. "Of course." She smiled, taking another sip. "Good." Then she turned, walking away like she hadn't just invited me to sit around drinking with the 2 men she had been screwing behind my back. She still thought I was blind, and I was about to make her regret that. Megan, Danielle, and I had already planned our counterattack. While Ben, Chris, and Sam envisioned a laid-back weekend at the island resort, we were orchestrating a completely different kind of retreat. A retreat designed to be seen. Megan booked a private villa at a resort 2 hours up the coast, the kind of place that catered to luxury travelers and couples looking for an escape. Danielle made sure our plans were just public enough, tagging locations, posting photos that left room for interpretation. Not lies. Just enough truth to light the match. We arrived separately. Megan first, then Danielle. I checked in last, making sure everything was in place before we made our first move. The first post was subtle. A picture of a sunset from our villa's balcony, 2 glasses of champagne in the foreground. Danielle posted next. A shot of the resort's infinity pool, her legs stretched out in a lounge chair. Then Megan sealed it. A single caption, nothing like good company in the right place. She didn't specify who that company was. But by morning, the messages had started rolling in. Sam called first. I let it ring. Then Ben. Then Chris. Then, finally, Sam again. I picked up this time, keeping my voice even. Hey. She hesitated. Where are you? I smiled slightly. On a trip. A pause. Then, carefully, with who? I glanced at the balcony, where Megan stood sipping coffee, her phone lighting up with messages of her own. Danielle sat by the pool, scrolling through her feed, smirking at whatever she was reading. I turned back toward the room, keeping my voice light. Just some friends. Silence. Then Sam exhaled sharply, her composure slipping for the first time. Mark, what the hell is going on? I let the moment stretch. Then I chuckled. You'll figure it out soon enough. Then I hung up. By the time the group reached the island resort, the damage was already spreading. Ben had seen the posts. Chris had seen them. And Sam? Sam was unraveling. Megan sent me a text later that afternoon. Sam's losing it. She asked Danielle if we were all together. Danielle followed up an hour later. Ben and Chris aren't talking much. They know something's off. I leaned back on the lounge chair, exhaling slowly. Good. Let them wonder. Let them feel the doubt crawl under their skin, the way we had felt it for months. Because by the time this trip was over, they weren't going to be questioning what was happening. They were going to be questioning everything. And that was when we would strike. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the kind that cast a warm glow over crystal glasses and polished silver. It was the kind of event where men straightened their ties a little too often, where women held their champagne flutes just right, where reputations mattered more than the air they breathed. Charleston thrived on nights like these. And tonight, so did we. I stepped into the room, adjusting the cuff of my jacket, feeling the weight of every gaze that landed on us. Megan stood on my left, in a deep red gown that commanded attention. Danielle walked on my right, sleek and poised, the cool confidence in her expression daring anyone to question her presence. We moved in sync, an unspoken agreement holding us together as we passed through the crowd. The effect was immediate. Conversation stuttered. Eyes darted between us, then across the room to Sam, Ben, and Chris, who stood frozen near the entrance. It took less than a second for the shift to register in their faces. Ben's jaw tightened. Chris ran a hand over his tie, feigning composure. But it was Sam who gave herself away first, her fingers clenched around the stem of her glass, her throat bobbing as she swallowed hard. Megan leaned in slightly, her voice just for me. They were not expecting that. I smiled. Good. Danielle reached for a flute from a passing server, her tone light. Let them sweat. We made our way deeper into the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, playing the roles we needed to play. I spoke with colleagues, nodding at familiar faces, accepting backhanded compliments from men who secretly wished they had the nerve to walk in with 2 beautiful women on their arms. Megan laughed at all the right moments. Danielle touched my arm just enough to keep the illusion intact. And across the room, Sam watched. Her eyes followed my every move, her attempts at conversation falling flat as her attention kept snapping back to me. I let her watch. I let her sit with it. She had spent months thinking she was in control, believing I was the one left in the dark. She had convinced herself that Ben and Chris were her little secrets, that she could keep them separate, keep the lies neatly folded away where no one would ever find them. But now, she was the one wondering, who had betrayed who? How much did I know? And most importantly, what was coming next? The answer was simple. Everything. Megan excused herself to speak with an investor's wife. Danielle drifted toward an old friend, leaving me alone just long enough for the inevitable. Sam moved. She approached with measured steps, her mask of confidence slipping with every inch she closed between us. Mark. I turned, letting my gaze sweep over her. Sam. She searched my face, looking for something, anything, that would explain the shift. You didn't tell me you were coming. I sipped my drink, watching her. Didn't I? She let out a quiet breath, frustration flickering behind her expression. We were supposed to talk this weekend. I tilted my head. Were we? Her lips parted slightly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. She wasn't used to this. She was used to me being the one asking the questions, trying to close the distance. Not the other way around. Ben and Chris were still across the room, watching but pretending not to. Ben whispered something to Chris, and I saw the flicker of uncertainty pass between them. I took another slow sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch just long enough for it to sting. Sam exhaled sharply. "Mark, what is this?" I smiled. "This." I gestured around the room. "This is a party, Sam." Her fingers twitched against the glass in her hand. "That's not what I meant." I let my gaze drop to her wrist, where she wore the same bracelet she had worn the night at the marsh. The same one I had seen in the reflection of Ben's deleted photo. My smile didn't waver. "Then ask a better question." Her breath hitched, just slightly. For the first time since this started, she wasn't in control of the conversation. I leaned in, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "Enjoy the night, Sam." Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I didn't have to look to know she was still standing there. Stunned, silent, and finally, afraid. Because she knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The ballroom hummed with quiet tension. Conversations carried on, but there was an undercurrent of unease, a ripple spreading beneath the surface. The weight of unspoken words, of things left unsaid, pressed against the air like a coming storm. Ben and Chris moved first, pushing through the crowd with purpose, their eyes locked onto Megan and Danielle. They had spent the last hour stealing glances, whispering to each other, their growing frustration bubbling just beneath the polished veneer of their tailored suits. Ben's voice was low but sharp. "What the hell is going on?" Megan sipped her champagne, her expression unreadable. "You'll have to be more specific." Chris stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Cut the games. The posts, the trip, all of this. You're trying to make a point." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "And?" Ben scoffed. "And we deserve an explanation." Megan let out a short laugh, setting her glass down with deliberate care. "That's interesting. Because for months, I've been waiting for an explanation too." Chris exhaled sharply. "Megan," she held up a hand. "Save it." The weight of the moment settled, the space between them shrinking, charged with something electric. Chris and Ben had spent months lying, manipulating, covering their tracks with half-truths and calculated charm. But now, they weren't the ones pulling the strings. Sam appeared at my side before I could move, her nails digging into my wrist as she pulled me toward a secluded corner. "You did this," she hissed. I turned my head slightly, meeting her eyes, calm and steady. "Did what?" She let out a short breath, trying to steady herself. "You orchestrated all of this. The trip, the photos, the way people are staring at us." I glanced over her shoulder, where guests were stealing glances, their curiosity barely concealed. "You always liked attention, Sam. What's the problem now?" Her grip tightened. "Mark, you don't want to do this here." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Oh, I do." She swallowed, her lips parting as if searching for the right words. But before she could find them, Megan's voice cut through the air. "Shall we get to the main event?" The room fell into a hush. Conversation stalled. Guests turned their attention toward us, drawn by the shift in energy, by the slow unraveling of something they didn't quite understand yet. Ben's voice was sharp. "Megan, don't." She ignored him, pulling her phone from her clutch. With a single tap, she projected the first image onto the large digital screen mounted above the bar. A text thread. Between Sam and Ben. Then another. Between Sam and Chris. Low murmurs spread through the crowd as the messages scrolled, the words damning in their simplicity. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Same time tomorrow? Mark won't even notice." Then a final one. From Ben to Chris. "If Danielle and Megan ever found out, we'd be screwed." A single beat of silence passed before the entire ballroom erupted. Gasps. Whispers. Someone stifled a laugh, sharp and delighted at the scandal unfolding in real time. Sam's face drained of color. Chris's shoulders tensed, his hand twitching at his side. Ben's jaw locked, his nostrils flaring. Danielle stepped forward, her voice light but firm. "We already knew, of course. We just thought we'd let everyone else in on the secret." Megan smiled, taking a sip of her drink. "Consider it a public service." Chris turned to me, his voice a low growl. "You set us up." I adjusted my cuff, looking at him evenly. "You set yourselves up." Ben let out a sharp breath, turning to Sam, his voice laced with frustration. "How could you be so careless?" Sam blinked, her breath shallow. "Me." Her voice wavered, panic creeping into her tone. "You think this is my fault?" Ben's lips curled. "You didn't exactly cover your tracks well, did you?" Chris scoffed. "Like you did." The tension shifted, turned inward. Sam, Ben, and Chris weren't just caught. They were turning on each other. I watched, amused, as they scrambled to rewrite the narrative, to shift blame, to find an escape route that didn't exist. Because no matter how they twisted it, no matter what excuses they tried to spin, the damage was done. And we were just getting started. Sam's hands trembled as she grabbed my arm, nails digging into my sleeve. The noise of the ballroom had faded into a dull hum, but her voice cut through it, strained and desperate. "Mark, we can fix this." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in months, I didn't see the woman I married. I saw someone else entirely. Someone who had spent too long believing she was untouchable. Someone who had played her game so well, she never considered losing. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "Fix this," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Tell me, Sam, what exactly is there to fix?" Her eyes darted around, looking for some kind of escape. "We do not have to let this get out of hand. We can talk. We can figure things out privately." She glanced at the screen where her messages were still on display, burning into the eyes of every guest in the room. "This does not have to be," I cut her off. "Public." I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough that only she could hear me. "You had no problem sneaking around in public places. No problem lying to my face, to Megan's, to Danielle's. But now that the whole town knows, now you want privacy?" She swallowed, blinking rapidly, her confidence cracking under the weight of reality. I leaned in just slightly. "You do not get to decide how this ends." Her breath caught, her fingers loosening. I stepped back, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I laughed. Not out of amusement. Out of something darker, something sharp and final. "You thought you had everything under control," I said, shaking my head. "You thought I would never figure it out. That Megan and Danielle would be too blind, too trusting to see the truth." I let my voice drop lower. "But you were wrong. About everything." She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg. But I was done listening. I turned without another word, stepping past her, leaving her frozen in place, her world collapsing around her. Ben and Chris stood nearby, pale and stiff, trying to act unaffected while the entire room whispered about them. Megan met my gaze, her smirk barely concealed. Danielle stood beside her, arms crossed, head tilted, watching the men who had betrayed them. Megan exhaled, looking at Ben. "I do not think you have anything left to say to me." His throat bobbed as he tried to form words, but none came. Danielle arched a brow at Chris. "And you?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Danielle," she held up a hand. "Save it." Chris and Ben had spent months pretending to be in control, weaving their lies so seamlessly they believed them to be untouchable. Now, standing under the glow of the chandeliers, with eyes burning into their backs, they had nothing left. Megan reached for her clutch, her voice light, dismissive. "We will be reassessing things." Danielle nodded, mirroring the same easy, practiced detachment. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." With that, the two of them turned and walked away. Chris inhaled sharply, looking at Ben, at Sam, at the crowd still watching, whispering, judging. "Well," he muttered, adjusting his tie. "That went well." Ben exhaled, shaking his head. "Shut up." Sam was still standing there, motionless, staring at nothing. I did not bother to check if she was breathing, thinking, regretting. Because whatever she was feeling, it was too late. For all of them. I turned and walked toward the exit, my steps slow, deliberate. And as I pushed through the heavy ballroom doors into the crisp Charleston night, I did not look back. Not once. By morning, the damage had already been done. Word traveled fast in Charleston. Faster than logic, faster than discretion. The country club crowd, the boutique owners, the gym trainers, the old money housewives who ran charity luncheons, they all knew. They had seen the spectacle unfold in real time, whispers spreading like wildfire, twisting into something even uglier with each retelling. By the time I walked into my usual coffee shop, the barista barely hid her curiosity. She handed me my black coffee with a small, knowing smile. "Quite the event last night." I smirked, taking the cup. "Something happened?" She let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, you know, just the usual Charleston gossip." I gave her a nod and walked out. The usual. Except this time, I was the one who set the fire. Sam, Ben, and Chris, they were the ones burning. I didn't go home that night. I didn't need to. I had left Sam where she belonged, standing in the ruins of her own lies, scrambling for a way to save face. When I finally checked my phone, there were 5 missed calls from her, a handful of unread messages, and 1 voicemail I had no interest in hearing. I deleted them all. She was someone else's problem now. By noon, the first cracks in their carefully constructed image had started to show. Ben and Chris were trying to act like nothing had changed, showing up at their usual spots, forcing casual conversations with friends who were suddenly a little less warm, a little more distant. The problem with reputations like theirs was that they were built on perception. They had spent years crafting the illusion of success, good husbands, loyal friends, respectable men. But the second that illusion shattered, there was no putting it back together. And Sam? She had never experienced what it felt like to be on the other side of the gossip. She had always been the one whispering, the one smirking behind her glass of wine as she picked apart someone else's scandal. Now, she was the scandal, and Charleston wasn't going to let her forget it. Megan and Danielle had their own plans. I met them at the marina that afternoon, the water calm, the docks quiet except for the occasional passing boat. Megan sat on the edge of the pier, sunglasses shielding her eyes as she scrolled through her phone. Danielle leaned against the railing, sipping an iced coffee, her expression unreadable. Megan was the first to speak. Chris is trying to talk his way out of it. Danielle snorted. Ben, too. He actually asked if we could start fresh. I raised a brow. That fast? She shrugged. They think if they control the damage, they control the outcome. Megan glanced up from her phone. But they don't, do they? I smiled. Not anymore. We sat there for a moment, the ocean breeze cool against our skin, the weight of everything settling into something lighter. None of this had been easy, but it had been necessary. Megan exhaled, tossing her phone onto the dock beside her. I haven't decided yet. I nodded, understanding without needing to ask. Danielle crossed her arms. Neither have I. Whether they walked away from their marriages or not was their choice. That was the difference between us and them. We didn't take choices away. We exposed the truth and let it speak for itself. As for me, there was nothing left to decide. Sam was already a part of my past. I had spent months wondering if I was imagining it, if I was seeing things that weren't there. But now, I saw everything clearly. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward. Megan tilted her head, studying me. You seem good. I smirked. I am. Danielle sipped her coffee. So what now? I leaned back, feeling the sun on my face. Now? I said, exhaling slowly. Now, I enjoy the silence. By the time the sun set, I had turned off my phone. There was nothing left to hear. No explanations, no apologies, no desperate attempts to fix what was beyond saving. Sam, Ben, and Chris had spent months believing they were untouchable. But they forgot one thing. Eventually, everyone gets caught. And when they do, some of us walk away. Others? They have to live with what they have done. That was their punishment. And I was happy to let them suffer. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.